Radhe Radhe. Today is Saturday, 8th February 2025, and a very, very special, auspicious day. In fact, as we mentioned in class, Bhishma Ekadashi did encourage people to take a look at that if they're not familiar. So, one of several, I think, homework exercises we had given today live in class. You can read up about that. But indeed, on this special day, we were extremely blessed and grateful to have your participation for Bhagavad Gita study. So we'll see briefly in this recap video what was covered. I'll bring up the slides and take a look at today's content. So as you all remember or are seeing now live, we covered two verses, chapter 10, verse 21 and verse 22. As always, first up, of course, was the recap quiz to cover last time's content. Last week when we met, we covered chapter 10, verses 19 and 20. As always, do take a look at the description for this video. You'll find a link to the free community portal page where you get the slides that you're seeing on the screen, the quiz questions that are typically not a part of the recap video. So please do look at that portal and review or practice, go through that material at your leisure, go through all the other content and recap videos as well. So again, that recap quiz is for chapter 10, verses 19 and 20. Today, the summary for this recap video will cover chapter 10, verses 21 and 22. So let's take a look at chapter 10, verse 21 first. Adityanamaham Vishnuhu Jyotisham Raviransuman Marichir Marutamasmi Nakshatranam Aham Shashi. So, chapter 10, verse 21, star of the show. We saw this in class. Star, of course, is, Sri Krishna. He says that, amongst the stars in the sky, he's actually the moon, providing the most brightness or luminosity, but also at the same time, star in terms of like an analogy or metaphor. He is the star. What show, whichever show, spiritually, everywhere in the universe, he is the star of the show. So, in fact, as we said in class, chapter 10, verse 20, remember from last time, was where we saw that Sri Krishna says that he is seated in the heart of all living entities. As we mentioned in class, this is a demarcation point, a transition taking place, because now, today, starting with chapter 10, verse 21, all the way beyond for many, many verses, Sri Krishna starts enumerating and briefly listing out or describing who or what he is. Could be an object, a person, a personality, an entity, an attribute. He starts listing those. And in fact, we counted towards the very end of class, if you remember. If you want to start this fun exercise, he lists four in chapter 10, verse 21, and he lists the same number, four, different four, in chapter 10, verse 22. So we covered eight different such entities or personalities or elements or attributes that Sri Krishna directly states that he is. So, chapter 10, verse 21, star of the show, he says that amongst the 12 sons of Aditi, he is Vishnu. Amongst luminous objects, he is the sun, S-U-N. Amongst the Maruts, he is Marichi, and amongst the stars in the night sky, he is the moon, that star of the show. So we covered all this detail, the commentary that Swamiji has in class, very briefly, the story of the Saptarishi, most revered, in fact, of all the Saptarishis, Sage Kashyap, and then his two wives, Aditi and Diti. From Aditi, 12 sons, famous personalities, celestial personalities, and of them, the foremost is Vishnu in the form of one of his 24 avatars we've studied, this one specifically being Vaman. If you remember, we talked about the story. I described briefly the Vaman story and then the three steps. The third step being, of course, after the universe and everything that, Bali had usurped or owned was taken. The third step was on Bali's head. And so you can go back and read more about that. So that is really Vishnu in the form of Vaman as one example of Sri Krishna's vibhuti, his opulence. We had, of course, then this, doha or chopai from the Ramayana, right? Rakapati rasa uhahi Taragana Samudai, Sakala Gidina Davalai, Binu Rabirati Najai, Siyawara Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Mere Prabhu Ram, Sita Ram. So here it is from the Ramayana stating that the sun is supreme. How it is, the example is of all these lamps that are, turned on, as well as all the stars that are in the sky, all that combined, and with the moon as well, they cannot remove the darkness of the night. That darkness gets removed only, of course, when the sun is rising, when the sun is visible. That's when truly the night gets dispelled. That's the power of the sun, which Sri Krishna says is another of his vibhutis. Spiritually as well, we've talked about this. The sun providing light, light taking away the darkness that stems from our ignorance. Now, that being said, well, within the darkness itself, you talk about the night sky, so pure ignorance. And if you had only these limited number of stars as well as the moon is the foremost. And that is way better than the stars. So, as Swamiji says, one moon is better than 1,000 stars. Sri Krishna is not only the sun, sun, he is also the moon, because amongst all these constellations and stars in the night sky, the moon is he. He reveals his best opulence from there. Finally, we also saw that last paragraph introducing us to the Maruts, the story about Indra and Diti. So you can go back and read that as well. The point here is that, again, those fetuses, as they split or were, broken, 49 fetuses emerged, not just pieces. And in fact, they became very, very helpful primary fetuses. They became these 49 Maruts, the different wind gods. And of them, the foremost is Marichi. And Sri Krishna says that he is that chief wind god, Marichi. As we stressed in class, this is different from Marich or Maricha. That is one of the, bad people or elements, demons, that was an associate of Ravan that Lord Ram had killed. So we want to make sure that there's no confusion between these two. If you remember, we also did show the flyer for class. So again, you saw this image. Which luminous star, star in double quotes, helps in removing the darkness of your night? We described in class as well the perfect setup here, in fact, of how the sun and moon are connected, the questions taking us up and down. So remember, as we see in the commentary by Swamiji for this chapter 10, verse 21, the sun is the one that takes away the darkness of the full night. So that's one, and that is Sri Krishna. At the same time, if you only had the constellation and the stars in the night sky, the moon is the brightest, the most luminous, and the moon truly also does take away our darkness. I mentioned how sometimes people have had to study in moonlight. So keep that in mind. And of course, all this, if you follow the mouse directionally, we have the sun, we have the moon, and of course, we have Radha Krishna. Sri Krishna is always there. Sometimes we recognize, sometimes we don't. But Sri Krishna is all these, the moon and the sun, and he takes away the darkness of our night, spiritually, of course, as well. Let's look at an important Sanskrit word we add to our dictionaries or revisit that term. Let's take Anshuman. A lot of this verse talks about luminosity or light and, in fact, radiance. Here, this adjective Anshuman is radiant. So let's store that. And then we move on to chapter 10, verse 22. Vedanam samavedosmi, devanam asmi vasavah, indriyanam manaschasmi, bhutanam asmi chetana. So here, chapter 10, verse 22, as we saw in class, the catchphrase is sense and sense ability. A little play on words there and twisting spelling a little bit, something you might recognize from elsewhere, but sense and sense ability, because Sri Krishna talks about that in this next list of four, right, objects that he is enumerating about. So amongst the Vedas, he is the Samved, and amongst the celestial gods, he is Indra. Amongst the senses, he is the mind. That's where the sense and the sense ability portion comes. And then amongst living beings, he is consciousness. So we described in class, Swamiji tells in the commentary, we have the four Vedas. Sri Krishna, of course, is all of them. In fact, we have learned, we've seen a video before as well, the Vedas emanate from God. They manifest from Him. They are all Him. He is them. Amongst them, the most musical one with the most, praises and hymns in, celebration of the Lord, that is the Samved. And so Sri Krishna says that he is the Samved. It evokes devotion amongst its listeners. Then Vasavaha, we see an appellation or a new name for Indra. Indra, the king of the celestial gods. We have seen that many, many times. And so we have this term or name here for Indra. We have Vasavaha, and he is the chief of the celestial gods. He is unparalleled. We know that. And in fact, Swamiji says it's very, very rare that a soul can have, right, with lifetimes of pious deeds, somehow get promoted to the position of Indra. Remember, we had this word resplendent, we've seen several times before. So it should be in your English dictionaries. If not, please go add it, of course. Take a look at what it is: shining, brilliant, bright, but much more as well. Resplendent glories of God. Indra reflects that. And so Sri Krishna says that he is Indra. He says he is Vasavaha. Now, the mind, the senses, we actually see an implication from Sri Krishna here that amongst the senses, I am the mind. So the mind is considered to be a sixth sense. Swamiji, in fact, gives a preview that in chapter 15, we shall hear that explicitly from Sri Krishna. But here, of course, the good example that we talked about, Swamiji mentions, is if the mind is not focused, if it wanders, then we lose control of the senses. So, for instance, as we are listening to somebody, we are hearing with our ears. But if the mind wanders, thinks about something else, then we will not be able to catch everything that that speaker said. We will not be able to summarize what that speaker may ask us to summarize. So it's very important. And in fact, the sixth and most important sense, the mind, that is who Sri Krishna says he is. And then we have consciousness, Chetana, that is a quality of the soul. We talked at length about how that is distinguishing a living person from a dead person. Remember the context of chapter 2, sentience and insentience. It is God seated in our hearts. Again, chapter 10, verse 20, Ashaha Stitaha. God seated in our hearts of these living entities, right? He's seated there and he is providing consciousness to our souls, to us. He is the super soul of the soul. He is Paramatma. He provides that consciousness. Therefore, we can use these senses to hear, talk, listen, etc. And when we talk about death, the body perishes, it withers away. The soul doesn't. The soul is immortal. But the soul, when it's out of that body, then it goes eventually either to God's abode, the blessed souls who get that opportunity, or eventually it finds a different body, one out of these 8.4 million species as we know. All that property, the sentience, the consciousness, has been taken away from that now dead body. And again, all that power comes from God. Remember the example we saw in class, energetic or the electricity grid or the powerhouse, that energy we get to turn on like this computer, our appliances, the internet, and so on. It's all because of electricity. If electricity is not flowing through, you can turn on the switch. It's not going to do anything. God, the energetic, the powerhouse, the grid, is the one providing that energy. And in this case, in this context, he's providing us consciousness to be able to really exist as these souls in the current embodied form. So, as Swamiji quotes from the Kathopanishad, Chetanash Chetananam, God is the sentience in the sentient. Let's take a look at an important Sanskrit word then. In fact, let's do two from this one. We've seen this before, indriyanam, that is amongst the senses. And then we just talked at length about consciousness, chetana. So we have chetana, consciousness, and amongst the senses, indriyanam. So these are the important words from chapter 10, verse 22. Final comment I do want to make is, in fact, now as we go back to the cover slide, the very cover slide of all these chapter 10 presentations, now you might take a look and recognize at least one of the images here. You see this. We've seen it, in fact, week after week. Maybe thought about it, maybe not thought about it, maybe ignored it, maybe missed it, or as they say, blink and you miss. No worries. Now you have seen that also today via the flyer. You've seen the question, and you've seen chapter 10, verses 21 and 22 from Sri Krishna. So we can make all those connections together. As always, we look forward to meeting you next time. So that'll be Saturday, 15th February, 2025, same time, which is 8 a.m. Central Time. That's Dallas, Texas, US time. And that is 7:30 p.m. in the evening, India time. Till then, keep your spiritual progress great. Keep studying. Go through the, recap video, this one. Go through the content on the community portal and your notes, your dictionary items. Don't forget some of the homework questions we had discussed in class, and we shall meet next time. Thank you. Radhe Radhe.